80 years after World War II, why do tensions between China and Japan persist? Japan says it has apologized many times, but many Chinese people say Japan has never truly apologized. Why does the wound from World War II still refuse to heal even today? The most obvious and the hardest to ignore is the Nanjing Massacre. As an outside observer, it is difficult for me to imagine the level of horror Asadi went through in just a few weeks. Families torn apart, civilians killed on the streets, and women suffering unspeakable violence. Many historical studies and international records show that the death toll reached the hundreds of thousands. A number like that is enough to leave any nation with a deep lasting scar. And the Nanjing Massacre was not an isolated event. Historical documents show that in northeastern China, the Japanese military carried out live human experiments, a fact that is almost impossible to imagine in the modern world. The test subjects in those records did not even have names. They were simply called materials. This kind of dehumanizing cruelty makes it easy to understand why many Chinese people still feel a deep sense of anger today. There was also the system of comfort women. Tens of thousands of women were forced into military sexual slavery, and a large number of them were from China. As a Canadian looking at this history, I do not see abstract statistics. I see ordinary people who should have had families, futures, and freedom but instead were stripped of their most basic dignity. When we compare China's death toll in World War II with the Holocaust in Europe, the picture becomes even clearer. In Europe, the Nazi genocide killed about 6 million Jewish people. It is one of the darkest and most thoroughly documented tragedies in human history. But when I looked at the wartime data from Asia, I found an even more shocking number. The Japanese invasion of China caused more than 18 million deaths, according to conservative estimates. Other widely cited Chinese studies place the number above 35 million. In pure numbers, the Chinese deaths caused by Japan's invasion were 3 times or even 5 times the number of Jewish victims in the Holocaust. Behind every number is a family that disappeared, a life that ended. This is not a matter of China choosing not to forgive Japan. It is the weight of history itself that makes forgetting almost impossible. After World War II, Japan did not face the kind of deep, painful reckoning that Germany went through. The reason was simple: the United States stepped in and reshaped Japan's fate. As the Cold War began, Washington saw Japan as a crucial anti-communist fortress in Asia. To stabilize the region and counter the Soviet Union, the U.S. protected Japan from a full-scale purge. If we look at the post-war reckoning of Japan and Germany side by side, you'll understand that although both were defeated nations, they ended up on completely different paths. Germany's war reparations were massive and long-lasting. Right after the war, Germany surrendered billions worth of industrial assets, factories, machinery, gold, ships, and rail equipment to the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and other allied nations. In 1952, under the Luxembourg Agreement, Germany paid 3 billion Deutschmarks to Israel and 450 million to Jewish organizations. Over the decades that followed, the German government and German companies paid more than $80 billion in compensation to Holocaust survivors. These obligations stretched across generations. Interest on World War I reparations wasn't fully paid off until 2010, and certain World War I-related commitments lasted until 2020. When we talk about Japan's post-war reparations, the scale is completely different from Germany. Altogether, Japan paid about $1.01 billion to Philippines, Indonesia, Burma, and Vietnam. Why not China? On September 8, 1951, the United States led the signing of the San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan. Although the treaty acknowledged that Japan should pay reparations to the Allied powers for the damage and suffering it caused during the war, it also stated that Japan's resources were insufficient to make full compensation while still maintaining a functioning economy. The treaty further declared that, except where otherwise specified, the Allied powers would waive all claims for reparations. The United States used the treaty to shield Japan, blocked large-scale prosecution, and limited Japan's payouts. The most ironic part is that China was never invited to join the treaty, because at the very moment the San Francisco Peace Treaty was being signed, China was fighting directly against the United States on the battlefields of the Korean War. When Beijing and Tokyo normalized relations in 1972, China prioritized diplomatic stability and future economic cooperation over pursuing compensation, seeing reconciliation with Japan as strategically more important. It wasn't just the reparations. The top leaders of Germany, Italy, and Japan faced completely different fates. Hitler committed suicide as Berlin fell. Mussolini was captured and executed by Italian partisans. Japan's Emperor Hirohito, however, received entirely different treatment. Although he was the supreme commander during the war, the United States protected him for Cold War strategic reasons, shielding him from any trial. Hirohito not only avoided all responsibility, he remained on the throne until his death in 1989, at the age of 87. When Nazi leaders were then subjected to large-scale trials, with many executed or sentenced to life in prison. Many class of war criminals were later released and returned to political and economic power. Despite the scale of Japan's wartime atrocities, only 7 class of war criminals received the death sentence. These differences shaped their post-war trajectories and their society's memories of the war. Yet today, these same individuals are enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine, a Shinto shrine in Tokyo dedicated to Japan's war dead. Because Yasukuni lists a class war criminals alongside ordinary soldiers. Visits by Japanese politicians repeatedly spark outrage in China, South Korea, and much of the international community. To understand why this is so shocking, consider a simple comparison. It would be the equivalent of Germany enshrining Hitler, Himmler, Göring, and other Nazi leaders in a national memorial, and having German prime ministers publicly visit to pay respects. To many people, Japan's official visits to Yasukuni look like an effort to downplay or even honor those responsible for wartime crimes. After World War II, Japan's reflection on its wartime actions became deeply divided. On one side, many Japanese scholars, journalists, and ordinary citizens continue to call for honest reflection, arguing that Japan must acknowledge its aggression and wartime atrocities. Cities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki promote powerful anti-war education to remind the world of the horrors of war. But on the other side stands a strong conservative bloc. Politicians, right-wing groups, and historical revisionists. They often downplay or blur Japan's wartime actions, sometimes even denying atrocities, portraying the invasion of Asia as self-defense or Japanese colonialism as modernization. This ideological struggle directly shapes Japan's textbooks. Japan's school textbooks are reviewed and approved by the Ministry of Education, which means political preferences influence how history is written. As a result, many textbooks use vague language, phrases like entered parts of China or the Nanjing incident, while avoiding clear terms such as invasion or massacre. They also place heavy emphasis on Japan's own wartime suffering, highlighting air raids, the atomic bombings, and post-war hardship. The influence of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party further reinforces this approach. Many of its politicians have personal or family ties to wartime institutions and prefer to soften Japan's responsibility for the war, which affects textbook screening and approval. In the most extreme cases, ultra-right textbooks go even further, denying the comfort women's system, downplaying the Nanjing Massacre, weakening descriptions of biological warfare, or even portraying Japan's invasion as a liberation of Asia. Japan used Official Development Assistance (ODA) to support China's modernization starting in the late 1970s. For Japan, ODA was a way to ease historical tensions, rebuild political trust, and secure stable economic ties with its largest neighbor. For China, the loans and technology helped accelerate infrastructure, energy, and industrial development during the early reform era. In the long run, ODA reduced hostility, expanded trade, and created decades of economic interdependence, shaping a more stable, pragmatic relationship between the two countries. Japan's former Prime Minister Tomoichi Murayama delivered one of the most historic and meaningful official apologies in Japanese government history. He stated clearly, Japan, through mistaken national policy, advanced along the road to war and brought its people to the brink of national ruin. Colonial rule and aggression caused tremendous damage and suffering to many countries, particularly the people of Asia. Beyond Murayama, other Japanese leaders have also expressed remorse. Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda and Prime Minister Yukio Hatayama both spoke of Japan's deep reflection on its wartime actions and emphasized the need to face history honestly. So, what do you think? How should Japan and China view their shared history today, and what lessons should the world take from it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means a lot, and it helps me make more content like this. Thanks for watching.